All right, everyone, we're just getting set up for forum. So just give us a few more minutes and we'll be ready to go. Forum right here, all right? Thank you. Okay. Here, Richard, do you want to do an audio test here?
Testing. 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 Testing.
Let's see. Richard, do you want to look at your output settings, make sure we're connecting to? We're trying to get your
Work.
your corral everybody, then I'll introduce you, okay?
Okay.
That is my son Christian. Ah, of course.
Hey, Dick.
I know, I know you
especially since my subject's on happiness, I can't tell you how well you get. Although, you guys probably through the whole week, I mean, working with middle schoolers, and today was just.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Forum. Thanks for coming to Forum this morning. We're getting a little later start than we normally do, but that's all right. This morning we have Richard Cameron here with us. Richard Cameron is a middle school teacher. He's got 20 years under his belt of middle school education. He got his master's in curriculum and instruction at UCCS. And Richard and his wife Jill have been at FCC for a number of years. And he's developed a special curriculum in happiness. He spoke at Forum. When was that, Richard? Pre-COVID. It was just before COVID, in the before times. And he brought to us this curriculum. And so today he's going to give us an update. Quickly, next week will be our final Forum of the semester. So you don't want to miss that. We're going to have Rabbi Jay Sherwood come to speak to us. And so, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Richard, all right?
Okay, good afternoon, or good morning still. As said, my name's Richard Cameron. I work at Horizon Middle School. Two things I can talk about real quickly to introduce myself is I just love teaching. I let it embody me. Probably less than a decade to expected retirement, and I have no interest at this point in thinking about it, though who knows how I'll feel in another almost a decade. Also, the source material for the unit I use is a documentary video called Happy. It came out in 2011. If you find of interest of what I speak about and you're an Amazon Prime member, it is available there. It is also available for about $9.99, whether you get the DVD or streaming. So I'm going to ask a quick question to the crowd out, to the people out there. How many of you have ever been told, do good in school so you can get a good education, get a good job, make a lot of money so you can live and be happy? Who's heard that from at least a teacher, if not a parent, or both? If you could just raise your hand and show me if people have heard people say that. Now, when you were told that as a child or an adolescent, how many of you were told what they meant by you'll be happy? How many people were explicitly explained what happiness was? And usually my first day of lessons start with a lesson on this, and that's the question I ask my students. Occasionally I'll get a hand or two that will go up yes to that question. I find out later as I get to know these students, there often is a spiritual background that they have been established what they mean by happiness. The origins of this happiness unit and how it came to be is right before I came across this information, I was beginning a spiritual transition in life that started at the JW lecture series when Joan Chittister spoke, and took me on a long journey, walking a good friend through his transition from life and ending up with John Shelby Spong. I bring that up because the spiritual part of this is what I was in hunger to bring into the classroom. I'd also think it should go without saying, or let me just say it, is both of my educational path and my spiritual path I owe to one moment, one person, one singularity. And those who know Casey Tenzik, she was my first principal, and I just got done telling her that to this day when I teach, I feel her looking over my shoulder. I'd be more upset if I disappointed her than if I did my current principal. She is also the same person that when my wife and I were in search of a church that we felt comfortable raising our daughter in, that kind of, just by speaking about her connection to the church brought me closer, and we found ourselves here. So I want to put a nod out to her for kind of started. Without her, I don't think this unit would have ever happened, because both things happened through this church and through her guidance. And as I said, the spiritual transition made me feel compelled to provide a path of certain insights with students that I was gaining. We were near the end of a school year with about 3 days left, and my fellow teacher brought up this video that we were able to stream back then called Happy, and said, I think this will keep them busy. For, as I'm going into this week, if you've ever been in a middle school the last week of school, part of it is just keeping them contained and from tearing down the walls. And she said this video will probably keep them interested. And what I found was, when I showed it the first time, where they were transfixed. They seemed hungry for the subject matter that this video goes for. And that, did I miss nope, didn't get there yet, felt compelled. Okay. The next thing after I asked the question about whether these children were given a definition of happiness, I start off with the first 2 to 3 minutes of the video, which features a humble man that you see pictured here named Manoj Singh. And Manoj Singh is a rickshaw driver in Kolkata, India. At the making of the video, Kolkata, India was the most impoverished city in the world. When you see the landscape between buildings seem to be enveloped by shacks and cardboard structures and canvas structures. One that he lives in that's only 3-sided. He, near the end of his segment, talks about how, although his house is only 3-sided, it's really nice in the summertime with the breeze it brings into his house. Although he has to work in monsoons in India, he feels at least it cools him off from the heat. He deals with drunk passengers that if he was rude back to, he would not make the meager living that he barely makes. What's interesting about this segment is we find that Manoj Singh, on an international study, a worldwide study, rated his level of happiness at the exact point of the average American's rating of their happiness. And I generally start the unit off, what does this say about Americans? Or does Manoj know something that we don't know? That, are we just so spoiled we rate ourselves as the same that a rickshaw driver? Or does he have something that goes a little deeper? One of the challenges in terms of bringing other adults on board is the definition of the word happy. To adults, the word happy has its frivolous connotations. If most of us in the room that might have been of consciousness during the 70s probably got tired of all the self-help books, and people say we have a fixation with happiness, especially the baby boomers' parents who lived through the Depression. And I do get pushback from other teachers about this, about it being a trivial subject. But happy is just the hook. It's probably why they titled it Happy. Nobody's going to want to, especially a middle schooler, engage with something called fulfillment, or as Joseph Campbell calls it, bliss. So to get them on board, I chose to stick with the title, happiness. It's a catch, it's a buzzword for bliss, fulfillment. And then I transitioned throughout the unit to bring them to those terms and understanding the meaning. But and quite frankly, I'm more concerned with the kids' buy-in than other adults' buy-in. So I start the unit off making sure they understand there's a difference between pleasure and what we're going to define as happiness. early on. And as you can see by the scale, I kind of hint to them right off the bat that pleasure has its place, but it is far outweighed by pure fulfillment. And maybe you all had a toy or maybe a recent toy you just bought, a cell phone or a new car, or maybe you go back to when you're a middle schooler or junior high student, and I asked them to think about that one, usually it's a video game or a type of cell phone that you wanted so bad and couldn't wait to get, and they all thought about it. I'm like, raise your hand if you were super happy and could remember the day you got it, and their hands stay up. And then I say to them, how many of you within a week, a month, even a year were ready for the new version of the game, the new cell phone, and the glitter was kind of off of it, and a bunch of hands go up. And then I ask, how many of you through the Girl Scouts or through the Boy Scouts or through school itself has served somebody and looked them in the eye, sort of like a Marion kitchen kind of thing, where you served? And a lot of their hands go up. They've sung at old age homes. They've worked food, soup kitchens and provided through their churches. And I asked them, how many can think of a moment, and as you're thinking about it, you start feeling really good about now, and a bunch of hands go up for that as well. And that's kind of how I illustrate the difference between pleasure and happiness. Pleasure is short-lived. It might be high impactful, but it does not last. It does not continue. I also don't bash the concept of pleasure, much like the Buddha didn't. I'll get to that part later now that I think about it. The video starts us off with a pie chart that I make sure the kids get into their head right away. And this pie chart, through psychological studies and what's now called positive psychology, which is an accepted branch of psychology. Back in the 70s, it was kind of laughed at and pawned upon. But when we look at the things that influence our happiness, 50% of it is a genetic set point. That's why we have our friends that never seem to get too excited. We also have our, I call them Tigger friends, like Tigger from Winnie the Pooh. They're just always excited, ready to go. And that means that you have a general set point for how low you'll go in your sadness and how high you're capable of going in your happiness. That's kind of scary that 50% of our happiness we have absolutely no control over. Then the 10%, it's kind of tough to tell by their font, circumstances are basically things like social status, income, even health, things that we have some control over, but if you don't get into the school you want, or you can't leave your job for higher education because you have a family, that 10% even seems pretty scary. On top of that, those are the kind of things we just talked about that our parents, our teachers, and more importantly, our advertisers want us to believe are the things that are important in our happiness. Again, we'll get to that in actually the next slide. And that brings me to the three, and I label it for the students, false pillars of happiness. These are extrinsic goals. These are what I would label under pleasure. I emphasize to them, like the Buddha did, that the denial of desire or pleasure doesn't really work, but instead, learning to understand what pleasure is, you can then control it and use it as a healthy reward system for yourself. How many of us have not said, hey, I worked hard this week, let's go out with a buddy and have a quick cold beer? Or, hey, I just got a bonus, let's go out for sushi tonight and have a big dinner. If you can accept that as a reward system, it can be kind of healthy. But defining these false pillars as happiness is what I let the kids know, the center of addictive behavior. If happiness is when I have that cold beer, or I go out shopping, or I eat a fancy meal, then you're waiting for the next time you get to do that. And And the three false pillars, as I call them, are basically appearance, everything from the way we dress to the way we look. I mean, it's great to work out at a gym if you're doing it for your health and feeling good and breathing better. But if you're spending a little too much time in the mirror, you're getting a quick pleasure as opposed to some long-term difference. Status. You know, again, if you, in my field, if you're trying to strive to be a principal because you have a strong vision of what a good school would run with, power to you. But if you just want to check that one off for the income and say, hey, I'm principal, again, that's pleasure, not fulfillment. And of course, the big one is money and materials. Madison Avenue would love you to believe that these pillars of happiness, they depend on us to believe in this. In fact, I think of, I don't know how many of you were fans of a show called Mad Men back not too long ago. There was a major advertising whiz named Don Draper. And he makes a comment, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's not enough for our customers to want a product. They have to be frightened to not have it. These things that they market to us, you know, the money, the material things, they first have to brainwash that's what happiness is. You know, get this Buick so your in-laws don't think you're a loser. Hey, the new one my wife and I just came across, who's noticed all these commercials by detergent companies about clothes smelling even after they're washed? When did this become a problem? Who is having this problem? And again, it seems like they came up with a great way to make us frightened. My clothes smell after I wash it. I doubt it, but if they can get you to buy this new product, that's, I think, where we're looking at. But when it comes to money and happiness, does money buy us happiness, or does money can't buy us happiness? Well, when we look at this graph, there's some kind of enlightenment here. So first of all, money, as the video points out, money can't buy happiness. Can you thoughtfully say that to some of our less fortunate brethren in our city without sounding shallow and heartless? You know, hey, I'd love to help you out, but, you know, money doesn't buy happiness, so I'm doing you a favor. See you later. But on the same time, money can buy happiness. Try telling that to Robin Williams or Whitney Houston or Hunter S. Thompson. Actually, and this is a 2013 survey, but after about 100,000 household, about 50,000 per spouse, the self-reporting of how people see their happiness levels off. And that line typically continues up into the millions of dollars. And the major point is that, yes, happiness does bring a certain amount of happiness when your basic needs aren't being met. But once you can afford to have your basic needs met, you have just as much potential to be happy as Bill Gates or any other multimillionaire. You also have just as much chance of being unhappy as they do as well. One thing, however, about the buying happiness, one article I came across that I shared with my students, if you're spending money on material items, it really doesn't increase your happiness on the long time. However, if you spend your extra income on experiences, vacations, concerts, things that bring community, and take a moment and think about that. Your last iPhone that you just updated to, your newest car, and then think about the last really cool vacation you went on. Which memory is going to bring you a lot more joy just even talking about it? You can feel it happening. When we go back to these takeaways, when you look at 50% you have no control of, 10% you battle for control of and need to earn some of that control, that seems pretty scary. And what I point out to the kids is that the 40% left blank is intentional activities, activities that we choose to do on a daily basis. And this is the meat and potatoes of the unit that are now make it more of a year-long journey, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But the 3 pillars of happiness that really do increase dopamine on studies, that also on self-assessed tests, people attest to making them happier, are this: personal growth, relationships, and our community. If you can focus just a few minutes, I should say, on at least one of these, if not try to put a little time aside for each of these areas of your life, your personal growth could be anything from praying, contemplation, yoga, sports, art, dancing, things that put you into flow, which I'll talk about as well. And with middle schoolers, I have to point out that the relationships we're talking about aren't your posse, the people that make you feel protected and good in a cafeteria, but those real friends, those friends that you know will be there with you through high school and college, those that you share with, that you give and receive from. And community, being involved in your church, your Girl Scouts, even the school community to get involved and be part of. One of the other things I suggest, it'd be great if you can find a career that you can exercise any one of these. And I can speak as a teacher. I get to do all 3 as a teacher. I'm constantly trying to be a better teacher, not every year, not every quarter, every day. And that's a cool thing, to put yourself into that mode of trying to be better, trying to analyze what I didn't do as good. Relationships. We're going to talk a little bit about post-COVID and how I became more aware of this unit doesn't work unless you build relationships with them, not just get them to like you, but to go deeper. And of course, the community. I get the school itself as a community of educators, community of people that make the building run, the parents, the businesses that contribute. I also tell them that don't have a B plan. I know one of these days a parent's going to freak on me for that, but I have a good friend who recently, his daughter in her mid-20s got accepted to Juilliard. She's been working at acting since I known her as a child. And I'm good friends with her dad, and I don't believe his mom, her mom as well, and I don't think they ever once said, hey, this acting thing seems pretty cool, but what's the B plan? If they did, maybe she'd be doing something other than studying currently right now at Juilliard, which is, for those who aren't familiar with their art, which it is an art school, but their arts program is pretty exclusive. I also tell them, if you find you're in a job that does not involve your passions, dedicate more your free time. Other quick takeaways I wanted to point out is ways to increase dopamine is things we talk about, activities, sports, which is the reward chemical that our brain makes for us. And in fact, well, let me just move on a little quicker so we don't get... We talk about flow. I mentioned that before. That's the kind of activity that you do that you lose sense of time. Sitting down to practice guitar and an hour goes by. Practicing some hoops. And we talk about the definition of the hedonic treadmill, how material things are fine to aspire to, but once you get this, you want to get the next one, and how that becomes like a treadmill. People bounce back from adversity, even one step further. Adversity is necessary for there to be happiness. I even show them a Twilight Zone episode of a guy that thinks he's in heaven because everything he wants is given to him, until he's bored out of his mind and realizes it's not heaven. He's in the other place, as 64 TV tells him. And the other place is actually for eternity, getting everything that you want in life with no risk of losing. And this is a cool thought I never thought about till I studied this video. They also bring up the presence that success does not bring anybody happiness. On the other hand, happiness breeds success. That when you come in and happy with people want to help you, people want to work with you, people want to mentor you. If you focus on the happy, the success follows after that. I tell my kids, you're having a bad day, and I know they have some really bad days going on these days, but if you could just pretend you're happy for the first period or two, wait to see how it rubs off by lunchtime. Maybe you'll accidentally find yourself happy. When I was teaching this for a couple of years before COVID hit, I found there was really strong student engagement. As I was telling my daughter on the way in today, the unit taught itself. I didn't have to sell them on the subject. They really ate this stuff up. I got a lot of positive parent feedback. I even had an email from a parent that said her daughter wanted to cut back or even stop her counseling, which was not my advice to go with based on it, but she was at least moving in the direction of being able to feel control of her happiness and and her expectations. It also revealed that students are generally want to be kind. This generation is amazing. They want to be kind. They're optimistic. They have an inclination towards wanting to produce positive change. I know I have one living in my house right now. But I see it since 2008, since the Great Recession. I've seen a shift in what's important to kids that I didn't see the year before. During COVID, which includes the last month of school that we shut down, I got to teach. I taught it as a unit then, so it was under my belt before that happened. But the next year we had the hybrid classes where the majority were learning through Zoom, and those that were coming into school were only coming 2 days. There was little student engagement, even they were very pessimistic about the concept we can control our happiness. There's increasing parent anxiety and lots of family concerns going on, as intense as a child I taught losing his grandfather, who was his father figure mom, and he lived with grandma and grandpa, and he lost them to COVID. Families who lost their money, that had to move during COVID because they couldn't pay their rent. And increasing a little bit of student cruelty and pessimism, but a big sense of isolation. An isolation that covered us into the next year. The post-COVID year, they came back wounded. I noticed through pure empathy and talking to them, there was a much more visible increase of student depression and anxiety. There's still continued parent anxiety and family concerns. I have about 3 parents that text me when they get done with their child's therapy because they know I'm that engaged with them, that they want me to know what might help their child and to please disseminate it against some of the less patient teachers. And this surprises me with middle school. There is an overall aversion to wanting to do cooperative learning and group work. I think when we put them in this current group through 6th and 7th grade or 5th and 6th grade, we're learning through a Zoom lens. And I learned that because we had them write every quarter an email home halfway through the quarter what their grades are like. And since it was the first quarter, I said, give yourself an A. That's not the important part. What's working for you? What do you care about in this class? And since we administer it through the English department in the first quarter, they have to CC me to get credit that they sent this email out. And what shocked me was how they wished they didn't have to work with partners or groups. They just wanted to come in and work silently. Some of the recent teaching is a continued recognition of how the students see, feel, and interpret their world. And again, this is important because they're much more cynical. To teach them to be happy, I have to walk the talk, and I have to get rid of all those teacher frustrations. Why aren't you doing this? You know what to do better. We teach the Boys Town method in our school, and exactly, I say, okay, tell me what you're not doing, tell me what you should be doing, model for me what you should be doing. But the key takeaway this year was a constant exercise of empathy. What's going on versus what should you be doing? And I kind of stumbled on this by accident. I had a young girl, beginning of the year, she was boisterous, but usually about what we were learning. She had a lot of energy, but one day her energy, when I had them in group work, she was just bouncing off the walls. She wouldn't do a thing. She wouldn't help her group. She was loud, and then she said, "Mr. Cameron, can I go to the restroom?" And I almost felt like saying, "Go to the restroom. You haven't done a damn thing all day." I'm like, "Why don't you sit down and work?" But then I said, "You know what? Why don't you go take your break?" And I calmed myself down. And I went out into the hall. I don't know where it came from, probably Leanne's sermons, the positive energy I bring out of here every week, but something instead I said, "What's going on? This isn't like you. What's happening?" And she welled up in tears and told me. I found out later her background with her biological mom is really tough. She's forced visitation, and she used to abuse her as a child, but she was but in this moment, she shared with me she really was close to her stepmom, and her dad and her stepmom got into a huge fight, and he kicked her out of the house and is thinking about having her arrested. I said, "Come on into the room. There's 10 minutes left. You're not going to get the work done. Why don't you just sit quietly? You know that's what you need to do. And why don't you see if you can get today's work done at home? You're a bright kid. You don't need the group." And I never once had a friction or conflict with that girl again. And I've heard from other teachers she could be a handful. The point I'm getting at is that if, as teachers, we often lose our temper, we often get frustrated, and the kids can feel that even when we think we're keeping poised. But how do you teach them to be happiness when you seem frustrated and angry? How do they want to believe in it? As I said, they're pessimistic. They need kindness. They desire to provide it more. They want it. They just don't trust it's there anymore. And they're skeptical when it's provided. So moving forward, I just got the news on Friday that my principal has got a promotion into his own, so we just had a new curriculum that kind of put things on hold for me and how I put happiness into the unit. I will still continue to teach this with every ounce that I can, but how I'm going to have to weave it through might be the direction and expectations of a new leader who has not been decided yet. But basically a move from individual learning unit to a series of lessons. So instead of having a unit on happy, I now have a concept to start next year where when we're in a unit and need to practice a reading or writing skill, we can take and go into the happiness mode and do the same skill we're doing with the other thing through an article on happiness. I teach them how to take notes on documentaries with a 2-column note form. So it's a great way to weave it and weave it into a lot of the content even with the new curriculum ties in with the happiness. I'm honing the connection between happiness and death. There's a segment in there where a man that was the youngest, highest paid banker in Europe who gave it all up to work in Kolkata, India, at Sister Teresa's. It's a center for death and dying, where they literally take the untouchables off the streets and bring them in and give them comfort in dying, much as a lot of my brethren in here with Stephen's ministry go through, but walking them right to the death and the joy that he feels in being able to bring these people dignity to their death. Also the connection between death and life, but I still got to get my head around that because, as you know, suicide is a big issue. And before I can take that on, I want to make sure that they understand. One fact I do plan to share with them that I learned in Stephen's ministry from a suicide expert is this bridge down, I know it's down south not the Royal Gorge, but another bridge where many suicide attempts have happened, and many of them had failed. And when these people were asked, what went through your mind as you jumped off the bridge? It's like, why am I doing this? I don't want to die, as they were falling. And that was the overwhelming majority. That's a piece I could see sharing with them. But I do believe understanding the duality and the transition of life and death, it's something I need to move on and work with and work through. But this is where I'd like to take it. There's also a message in the video that I avoid a segment. It only runs less than a minute. And the message is great. It's about whether or not religion brings us happiness. And it basically, from self-assessed studies, have proven that if your church, if your religion, if your practice focuses on those outward, those people tend to rate their happiness higher. I mean, in terms of serving those outward. If your energies are out judging those outward and trying to create a world that fits your dynamic, those people rate themselves lower. I'm uncomfortable with this segment because it kind of shows the worst of Arabs and Jews and Christians that are saying horrible things about gay people. And I think for a middle schooler, it runs by too quick and it seems anti-religion, but if you listen to so I'm looking for some sort of material that, we have a lot of linear of teaching religion as a subject, not as a as a theology as opposed to that. That's the other thing I'd like to work into. How can their spiritual choices be worked into their happiness? And in a sense, that's where I'm going at with this thing. Time will tell what and how I'm able to commit this. I also have, if anybody has any questions, suggestions, information on the video, I put my email up there for anybody who may want to, if there's educators in here or thinking of using this or know an educator. I put that last slide up, and I don't know what time I started at. I know it was a little late after church, but I will, if there's anybody has any questions that I can answer for anybody or comments even. Yes, Tom. Those same three things. My spiritual journey and my educational journey brings me my personal growth. My relationships, especially with my daughter and my wife, is pure gold. And my community and the relationships of building people, making friends with people like you, Tom, making new connections in a church I've been going to over 10 years, which is still possible to do. So that's what makes me happy. You're welcome.
Richard, I have a question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier in the slides that post-COVID, there was an aversion to group study. Do you see that as a problem? Is that a sign of isolation, or?
I think the cause was, again, 5th, 6th, 7th grade is where they learn, where teachers typically teach who's the leader, who's the scribe, and how to work in groups, how to disagree differently. So we usually get them with a little preloading in 8th grade. So I think there was this anxiety of having to get in front of each other. It is a problem, but I love problems as a teacher to solve. And what I learned was, the first group thing I did this year with them, I lost my cool. Just by the 3rd day, I was like, you two aren't working, and and then they're fighting with me. You didn't see when we were working, and I just lost it. And again, that frustration shows it doesn't help not only in the happy unit, but it doesn't help at all as a teacher. So I rethought it, and I came back. I had a solution, but I shared with them first that my behavior, my frustration, I didn't blow up and scream, it wasn't, but I still needed to let them know where my frustration was coming from, that it wasn't them, and then I took ownership. And what I learned was, since I make them assign a leader, that I would be a facilitator. So if I came up and I saw a group that had its problems, instead of speaking to the group and taking on 4 kids, I would speak only to the leader and say, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm not seeing, and then walk away. Can you fix it to the leader, which is what their role is, and gives them an opportunity to solve it. There were a couple of other takeaways I had this year to make Keep the unit shorter, maybe a day. Start, at least in the beginning of the year, start with a day or two, not a full week of being in a group, because they start hating each other. But yeah, it's a problem, but one that it's on us to solve it, not on the kids. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, your name? Was your hand up?
Yeah, it is. I'm just waiting for the mic.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
I always struggle. You mentioned early on about talking to the students about, I think it was the idea that maybe happiness promotes happiness and maybe, unhappiness leads to more unhappiness. But that idea that if you felt unhappy in the morning, maybe you could, put on a happy face or try channeling some happiness, and maybe by lunchtime,
Right.
you'd be. But how does that fit in with the idea of not stuffing your emotions?
Oh, no.
And being being authentic and trying to determine, how do I truly feel, and why do I feel this way? How do you reconcile that?
I thank you for that question. Thank you for giving me a chance to clarify that. By no means do I tell them pretend to be happy, fake it. I present it more as like, if you try on this mask, if you try on this costume, at the very least, I guess the connection I share with them is not so much that you feel, sometimes that does work, sometimes just pretending to be happy. I once heard a marriage counselor years back that talked about telling couples, spend a week pretending you're in love. These are couples on the answer, and when you pretend to be in love for a week, you might remember why you were in love the first time, and then pretend to be happy, and if the other people are reacting to that, you might be happier by lunchtime because you feel the support of it. People want to be around you, because if you're feeling isolated, on the other side of that coin, I am in a constant connection with each student, especially since they desire a lot of individual work. I don't sit at my desk and grade. I won't get into it, I have a very obsessive compulsive spreadsheet that I use when I check in on kids, whether or not they needed it, whether they were on track or needed it, and I try to hit but I do talk about it's okay to be sad, and that some of us have no choice right now but to be sad due to chemical and, psychological, brain issues. How do I encounter that is I have to be there for them. I every single class, I stand out right in my doorway, and it's now fist bump. It used to be handshake, but since COVID, and I kind of like the fist bump better too, because I get a little icky with middle schoolers, if you ever watch their behavior, shaking their hands anyway. But I fist bump, and I look, and when they try to get in, I give the first 10 or so a ticket for a drawing for getting there early. They don't get a ticket unless they look me up in the eye and say good morning, good afternoon. And honestly, day 4, you can notice that girl that smiles every day is walking in with the stone face, and I have said to kids, hey, Rob, you doing okay? Or you want to go get a drink before do you need a moment before you come into the room? That's powerful. I've had a girl cry when I said that to her once, not because of what she was, but that somebody listened or saw it without asking. We have a survey, a vow survey that goes out to students, teachers, and then this year, the first year, they gave us back comments made about us by students that were specifically, and that one came up a lot. Mr. Cameron won't let us in till he, knows us or sees us. And so you're right. I'm very, in fact, this empathy thing that I've come across, I think that my bigger concern is when we have a thing called MTSS. It's kind of like a clinical approach to those kids that are rising to the top in more than one classroom. And when I mentioned I've spoken to the parents and found out they have extreme anxiety or depressive, I keep getting these things of, well, but other kids have that, or, that's still not an excuse that they just look at their fingers all period. And first, yeah, it is. And B, I think of my own daughter, and if she was in that situation, and I heard a teacher say that, it makes my skin crawl, I'll be honest. Their perception is their reality. To tell them it's not that big of a problem or you're being a drama queen. Some of them might be, they're middle schoolers. Middle schooler brains are coming apart and going together again. They are clinically, at the very least, close borderline schizophrenic. I mean, they have impulses. I mean, they literally, Casey Tenzik brought this information to me very early on in my school that when their brains separate during puberty, it's like a 3-year-old brain. So they're very egocentric. Think about your 3-year-olds that you may have been encountered with. Everything's about them. But here's the difference. When you're a middle schooler, you know not everything's about you. It just feels that way. Think how scary that is. I remember how scary that was. They're impulsive. When a kid throws a rock through a window right in front of you, and you say, why did you just do that? And they say, I don't know. Believe them. They don't know why they just did that. And they have that 0 to 60, especially as a father of a teenage girl. But don't let those boys fool you. They kick in walls. They cry. They, when their friends aren't around in front of their parents for no reason, and then come right back to the table 5 minutes later, like happy as a bee on a flower bed. It's just, they're an amazing animal, middle schoolers, and they are. And again, I give Casey Tenzik that insight, because when a kid does something and says, I don't know, it's kind of in an absurdist kind of way, comedic. In a movie, it's almost funny. And if you can remind yourself it's funny for you, the observer, but not so funny for the kid who just experienced it, you can meet some pretty good grounds. Teaching isn't easy. It's like somebody once, I was in an argument with somebody on Facebook back when I used to troll about Christianity and turning the other cheek. And they said, well, when Christ said that, he didn't mean these Muslims who blow us up. I'm like, no, that's exactly what he meant. He never said, well, first of all, he never said Christianity because he didn't define it as that. But nobody ever said that being a Christian is easy. And I'll say the same thing to any teacher. Who told you this job was going to be easy? Who told you that, when teachers complain, especially to students, I don't get paid enough for this crap or whatnot. I'm like, then you're an idiot. If you're here for the money, then what is that? I mean, it's not like you can't pick up Time magazine and realize how badly teachers are treated back when you were in college. How did you come into this profession expecting even respect sometimes if you listen to talk radio? Or Ivy Lou over in District 49 calling us groomers, which is a dangerous thing to do. That doesn't matter. Not everything in life that's of value is easy. And if you get into the uneasy part, you can find a lot of that joy, a lot of that zone, a lot of that pleasure that we talked about. Anything else? Before I say goodbye, or?
That might just be a great place to leave it, Richard.
Sure.
Thank you so much
Well,
for
thank you for
coming
the
to us.
opportunity and for showing up today.